do something to my hair, I'll ignore it. This book is dedicated to my son, Naeem. Thank you for coming here and saving my life. And this is Confessions of a Video Vixen. And there are 18 chapters. Introduction. No shame in my game. Like so many young girls, I grew up wanting to be famous. I used to watch television and dream about the Beverly Hills lifestyle seen in all of my favorite films. I wanted to live below that Hollywood sign and drive down Sunset Boulevard and over Mulholland Drive in a Mercedes Benz while wearing a designer scarf and huge black sunglasses. I wanted to be known by the rich and famous and be seen lunching with the in crowd. I wanted to live where they lived and do what they do. I wanted to belong. I reached most of my goals, but I didn't do it in a controversial way. I did it using the oldest trick in the book, sex. I am not always proud of what I did. I am not always proud of what I did, and there are things that I would do over if I could. But I made the best out of what I started with. An abusive mother and an absent father. I didn't write this book to excuse my past. I sat down to write this book because I think my story can serve as a warning to anyone aspiring to the kind of life I had led. And there are plenty of young people trying to do just that. Where young girls once inspired to be models and ballerinas, now they aspire to be hip-hop video girls. The next hot girl in the hottest artist videos. Having lived that life, I can say that it's not everything it's cracked up to be. And this is literally like pre-Instagram baddies, but same thing. It's like they converted the video vixens to Instagram baddies. And a lot of the Instagram baddies are in music videos. So yeah. It says, my hips have been swayed and popped on MTV while I danced on tabletops and poolside in some of your favorite videos. I've had sex with some of the most delicious and insatiable men in the world. Heads of music labels, NBA stars, and Hollywood. To say nothing of the emperors of hip hop, but there is an underside if sex and drugs went hand in hand with rock and roll. They are just as rampant in hip hop. I wouldn't call this book a tell-all since there is many details I have kept to myself for the sake of not embarrassing some of the people still associated with me. And now to find out that I have 10 people on this. Am I on the right page? Let me look. Hold on. Let me make sure that I am on the right page. Yeah, I'm not live on this. Am I live? Okay, because that's just a lot of people in here to be my backup page. I am on the right page. Cool. I don't even know what I was just talking about. Oh, the stuff that she didn't leave, the stuff that she didn't put in here. The stuff that she didn't put in here is the stuff that was talking about like the children, the bestiality. She did put a small part of the homosexuality in there, the gay stuff, the man on man. But she didn't put the incest stuff and all sorts of shenanigans. I'm sure she found out the infections because some of these people were infected. This is the stuff that she left out of the book. It says, okay, let's see. I wanted to save them embarrassment. Where's that at? Details such as which of my music industry suitors I caught in bed with his male lover, and which of my NBA exes often kept track of me by using the OnStar device placed in the Mercedes Benz he bought me, many times sending his associates to retrieve me from vacations and nights on the town. Yet, in the middle of this wild ride that I call my life, I was met with challenges which could have ruined me. If it had not been for the power of change, I am writing my story because I have seen too many 14-year-old girls dressed up like their favorite pop icons and young women dying to be thin or saving up for the new pair of breast implants that they are sure will make them stars. Young women who look up to me and women like me and ask to be plugged into the same circles I desperately tried to escape. I have so much firsthand information to offer and need those young women to know that there are other directions to take. There are always better choices. Hi. Than most of the ones being offered to women today. Better choices than the ones that I have made. The top reason a woman finds herself in a rap video sprawled undressed over a luxury car while a rapper is saying lewd things about her is a lack of self esteem. I know it sounds cliche, but no one who values, loves, or knows herself would allow herself to be placed in such a degrading position. Finding myself and learning to value who I am was one of the biggest hurdles I had to overcome. Before my video girl career, I was known in some circles as a stripper. Others knew me as Superhead, the insatiable lover of many Hollywood stars, sports figures, and some of the music's most influential performers and executives. None of that is who I really am, nor does it tell the whole story. Along my journey, there are things that I have seen and overheard which could tarnish and even demolish the reputations of some of these artists. I realized that I had power which had nothing to do with my body, my looks, or my sexuality. I had information, usually. Hold on. Where did I just go? I had information usually confide to members of the good old boys clubs of the industry. I had been allowed behind those doors as a modern day Mata Hari. Hi, thank you. I like you too. Hello. The late days of MC Light, Yo Yo, Sister Soldier, and Salt and Pepper had faded away, and that was very intentional. Our Queen Latifah had broken new ground in another sector, but has left her place on the throne of hip hop empty. And I believe the reason why she got out of hip hop is all the misogyny. She didn't want to be half naked, which we could have never seen Queen Latifah up there half naked, act talking like the city girls anyway. The messages that were out and the lack of money. Everybody knows that there's not any really money in music, but there's a lot of money in movies. Maybe. Because we do also talk about some of the actresses who didn't get their fair pay either. We'll come back to that. But they still get more money than artists usually. Sometimes. It depends on who you are. Where was I at? Our Queen Latifah had broken new ground in another sector, but left her place on the throne of hip hop empty, waiting to be filled. We live in a world where the only goals at the end of the day are profit and top 10 spots on the Billboard charts. Members of the industry are being rewarded for selling the most records, destroying in the process the most beautiful thing about us as a culture, our girls and young women. It was so easy to be drawn in and dominated by it all. Music videos occupied only a short year and a half of my life, but the pictures and the purpose are much larger than the magazines. Music videos, films, television continuously fill the head of young girls with visions of perfect bodies, sex, and money. Parents are often either absent or uneducated or both, rendering them largely unaware of what's going on right in their own living rooms. That little girl whose head was filled with those deceptive visions of wealth and fame is me, all grown up and ready to tell what I know. Chapter 1, Death and Life. I'm sorry, it's getting a little cold in here. Getting a little chilly, so I'm gonna put my coat on. So I'm getting a little cold. And this is crazy that this is October when this started, because we're here in October. And this is October 2001. So she was around. Super had really seen a lot. She probably also seen people disappear. That's probably part of the stuff that she didn't put in there as well. October. This would have been the month. August, September. This would have been September, October. 2 months after Aaliyah's death and 1 month after 9/11. This chapter. October 2001. I was lying on the hard, cold floor of the bathroom of the famous Chinese bistro Mr. Chow in Beverly Hills. It is one of the most upscale and renowned restaurants in the world, yet I was at the lowest point of my life. With my hand next to the toilet, I was alone, in debt, with no friends and no hope. Does that surprise me? I don't think that surprises me. Let me tell you why this all makes sense. Beyonce she dropped, when was Nasty Girl? Was Nasty Girl? No, Nasty Girl came out in 98. Something like that. Okay, so this is why Superhead was out. Aaliyah was gone. Beyonce had taken her place. There was a major shift in power. If you even go look on Jay-Z's album, there was a shift. He even said it in one of his songs. Now I gotta go look up the blueprint. Blueprint, Jay-Z. And I'm sorry, guys. I know I'm supposed to be reading, but I have to do a breakdown because it makes sense why she was down and out. What was the titles of the songs? Hold on. Oh, I can't see this. Zoom in. Can I zoom in? The Ruler's Back, Takeover. What's that saying? Heart of the City. Never Change. Yeah. I don't know why, but I want to say that Beyonce was part of her takedown. Because she went through a whole phase of everybody stopped messing with her and she lost everything and everybody didn't help her and everything. And I believe for it to happen right after Aaliyah died and right after 9/11, that would have mean that Beyonce was coming into power. A lot of people were coming into power around this time from destiny swapping. And we all know that she was directly tied to Jay-Z. She was directly tied to a lot of people, but she was directly tied to Jay-Z. So I want to believe that they had a lot to do with her losing everything. I would bet my last dollar on that. And we all know that Dangerously in Love, I think, when did Dangerously in Love come out? No, I don't think Beyonce was old enough yet. So I don't think they had that come out yet. I think that came out in 2003 when she was old enough. Even though she was dissing everybody that took a picture with the nigga. So, I mean, you're not dating him? Okay, it didn't come out till 2003. But the reason, we'll go back to that. But I think that they had everything to do with her takedown. Okay. It said, okay, so I was at the lowest point of my life with my head next to the toilet. I was alone, in debt, and with no friends and no hope. It had been a long, hard trip that led to this fall. It was a wild roller coaster ride, which included some of the hottest names in hip hop in Hollywood. For 2 years, I rode it out. I was in the middle of it all, dining with P. Diddy, partying with Vin Diesel. Guys, I know, is Vin Diesel? Okay, let me add something about Vin Diesel now. And I hate to do this, but I got to. Y'all remember how I talked about Fast and the Furious and how Paul Walker, because he didn't want to yacht out his daughter. If you don't know what that means, he didn't want to sell his daughter, and then they basically did it anyway. Well, who's a part of the crew? Vin Diesel, and then going one on one with Shaquille O'Neal. Aaron Carter has a song talking about how I beat Shaquille O'Neal. That is very telling. That's all I can tell you. That is very telling. It says, I had money, 3 cars, a condo, in a prestigious neighborhood, a nanny for my son. I had starred in some of the hottest music videos with Jay-Z, LL Cool J, Ja Rule, and Ludacris. I had even co-starred in the blockbuster film A Man Apart, opposite Vin Diesel. But hey, I lay on the cold floor, hugging the frigid porcelain, completely hopeless. I was broke, homeless, and probably dying. The last thing I remember was my body shaking violently as I sat on the toilet with my head in my hands, and my friend Ava hovering over me asking if I was okay. But now I was on the floor and she was gone. Can I move? Was the only thought swirling through my head. I tried to say something to make sure I was alive. I couldn't. I tried to move my leg. It worked. I stood up gingerly and made my way to the sink. I looked around the small, one-stall bathroom. It was dimly lit and tiny, yet elegant. I held onto the sink, looking at myself in the mirror. My pupils were fully dilated, and I could feel my knees wobbling beneath me. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping to snap out of the trouble I was obviously in. I looked at my jewelry and clothes. I still wore the diamond heart pendants and canary yellow diamond earrings that my ex-husband had given me years before. My ring and bracelet were gifts purchased at Tiffany. My long nails were perfectly French manicured, and my hair was long and black. My skin had been tanned by the Miami sun, and my eyes were gray thanks to my color contacts. My face was made up to the perfection. Compliments of Mac and Chanel. My jeans were a $200 pair of fashion icon Marc Jacobs, and the rest of the ensemble followed suit. Everything was designer made, from my jewelry to my makeup to the clothes that I wore, even the drugs I consumed. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor again. When I came to from another bout of convulsions, my tongue was swollen and bloody. I crawled up from the floor and made my way back into the sink to splash more water on my face. I desperately wanted someone to walk in and help, but no one came. I began to panic, with thoughts of the late actor River Phoenix racing through my head, thoughts of him seizing outside of the Viper Room not too far from where I was on Sunset Boulevard right before dying. And I think that she put that on there because I think she was scared that they were going to come for her. I think she's seen a lot of people disappear in her life, and she knew what it was. I thought of how awful it would be if I died in the bathroom at Mr. Chow. I thought of the irony of it all, of the paparazzi waiting outside for Nicolas Cage and LL Cool J, who are both in the dining area eating with friends. I thought of how pretty and rich I looked, yet my life had become ugly and poor. But the most prominent thought was of my son, Naeem. My nanny hadn't heard from me in months and had no idea how to find me. No one even knew my real name, or where I lived, or who my family was, or where I came from. To them, my name was was it Yvette? A name that I made up when I was 16 during my years as a stripper. I thought of Naeem and wanted to live. I thought if I screamed his name as loud as I could, God would hear me and allow me another chance at being a mother. See, and then another thing about her being a stripper at 16, that's no coincidence. They've been targeting her. That means that she was dancing and probably doing inappropriate things with grown men as a teenager. God had to know that despite everything I had done until this point, I loved my son and wanted to do right by him. I stumbled to the bathroom door, opened it, and began to scream his name into the stairwell that led downstairs into the main dining area of the restaurant. I screamed his name over and over until my voice was gone. No one heard me. I stumbled back into the restroom to splash more water on my face, hoping the water alone would be enough to reverse what I had done. My heart was racing, and its beats was all I could hear in my head. There were sweat beads on my face. My mouth was dry and my vision blurred. My body went into convulsions 3, 4, and more times, each time landing me on the cold, hard tile. No one was there for me. I was going to die alone. 1 year earlier, no one would have told me that my life would have turned out that way. I was invited to a function one Friday night, October 2000, at the Sky Bar, location on Sunset Strip. I reluctantly met an acquaintance there and quickly began to mingle. In order to make the best out of what promised to be a boring evening, the crowd was very scuffy, and I found myself yawning in between conversation with a concert pianist and a score composer. After about an hour of walking around, sampling the vast array of mediocre hors d'oeuvres, and oversized apple martinis, I was ready to go. As I searched for the accompanist who brought me to the event, he came up behind me and grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the pool. I want you to meet someone, he said. Gary, I don't know if this is Yazette or Yazette, I guess. This is Gary. As I said before, Yazette was a name and persona I made up when I was 16 after I ran away from my father and wanted a new identity and hopefully a new life. I landed in Los Angeles. Gary was handsome, dressed in all black, and of medium build and height. He was soft spoken and reserved. As we began to talk, he realized that we shared the same sentiments about the function we were attending. We laughed at each other's silly anecdotes and soon found ourselves exchanging phone numbers. After the function, we all headed over to a local nightclub called Nora's Cafe. There, we continued to sip martinis, and at one point, I am sure I climbed on top of a table and started dancing. It was a night to remember, but the following morning I had forgotten most of it. The next afternoon, when I had finally recovered from the night before, I checked my messages to find one from Gary. Initially, I couldn't remember who Gary was among the sea of people I had met at the Sky Bar and Nora's Cafe. After a brief moment of reconciliation, I began to connect the voice with my face. I failed. However, I returned the call. That Sunday, while I was driving around in West Los Angeles, my cell phone rang. The number was unfamiliar to me, so I answered with caution. Hey, Izette, this is Gary from the other night, the voice said. I rolled my eyes in silent response. I was used to the men hitting on me and thought that Gary was just another example, but I was wrong. What Gary said next would not only surprise me, it would change my life. He began to explain to me that he was a film director and he was in the beginning stages of production of his new film. He wanted me to pick up a copy of the script and read for him. He said there was a part he thought would be perfect for me. I was unsure what to think and actually doubted that he was a director of any substance. After you've lived in Los Angeles for a while, you begin to take what people say they do as a grain of salt, particularly in Hollywood. Still that Monday, I went to the address he gave me on Beverly Boulevard and I arrived at the production office and picked up the script. Once in my car, I began to read it and was baffled because the character I was to be reading was Candace Hicks. Appeared I was to be reading, Candace Hicks appeared nowhere in the script. The next day, I was called to read on camera for Gary and the producers. I read lines for another character while trying to conceal my nervous stomachs and dry mouth. Just as with many other things, I performed without thought. I read the lines through a few times, and that was it. It was done. Gary walked me out to the hallway and thanked me for coming by. I was still unsure of what I had just done. What what it was really for and who I was dealing with. Clue once he mentioned that I was up for the role of the wife of the character. Lorenz Tate was a name I knew from previous movies, so the project became a bit more legitimate and real. Had I known how big the opportunity really was, I might not have gotten through the audition. Was Superhead Cousin Faith? Now I'm about to Google that. Was Superhead Cousin Faith? Because I swear they look alike. Superhead Cousin Faith. Superhead Cousin Faith. No, that wasn't her. Sorry. Where was I at? I received a call from Gary's production. Okay. Okay, there we go. But I knew from his previous movies. Da, da, da. Okay. On the Thursday after we met, I received a call from Gary's production office telling me I had been casted as Candace Hicks, the wife of Demetrius Hicks, played by Lorenz Tate. They said that the part would have to be written for me. I was thrilled. Although I had acted all throughout my school years, and being in films was something I had always dreamed of, it was never something that I felt was an achievable goal, but here it was. After I digested everything, Gary's crew told me. It finally hit me. Gary was farm director, was, wait, is that say? Fame director F. Gary Gray, who had done Set It Off, Friday, The Negotiator, and would go on to direct The Italian Job and Be Cool. It was going to be a part of a big budget New Line cinema production. When I left my sad life and ran to Los Angeles, I had no idea what I would be doing. I had no idea how I was going to survive. For me, being part of a film was much more than surviving. It was a move towards succeeding. On the following Monday, just a week and a half after meeting Gary, I showed up for my first table reading with the entire cast. Gary sat at the head of the table and the Wren sat directly across from me. I didn't recognize many of the actors there, but was secretly drawn to the tall, muscular man sitting directly to my right. His voice was overwhelmingly powerful, yet his demeanor was gentle. From time to time, his shoulder brushed against mine, and I would get a rush. My attraction to this man was strong. His name was Vin Diesel. Coincidentally, my first film shoot would take place just a few blocks away from the house where I'd shot my first music video. We began shooting a man apart at Zumba Beach in Malibu. I awakened at 3 in the morning and got my keys to drive to the set. I glided into Malibu by the way of the well-known picturesque calm of the Pacific Coast Highway, with the windows in my car down so I could feel the air, brisk and moist with dew. I was blasting my radio and sang along loudly with every song during the 1 hour drive from my condo. I arrived on set and headed directly to the catering truck for the breakfast burrito and then sat in the hair and makeup trailer. I was officially an actress. I felt that everything I had done until that point, everything that had happened to me, from my abusive childhood, the rape, being a teen runaway, the stripping, had not stopped me or beaten me. I had reinvented myself. I was moving on, hopefully moving on. Perhaps when one has a difficult start in life, the universe has a way of balancing everything out. I do believe that every cloud has a rainbow and a silver lining. I had many, many clouds, more than most. Chapter 2. It says, the sins of a mother. I hate my mother. Those are strong words that are forbidden and shunned by God. And I struggled with this emotion every day of my life. But it's how I feel. As a child, while I see other children long for their mothers, cling to their mothers, cry for their mothers, I was glad when my mother was away. I hated to be near mine. I hated to hear her voice and would feel nauseous anticipating her return home from work. I cringed when she was in the same room with me and looked forward to bedtime because that meant, at least for the day, my time with her was over. I was fully aware that these feelings are that I was fully aware of these feelings as early as the age of 3 years old. It seemed almost unnatural for a child to despite the woman who gave him or her life. But my life was different. I knew I wasn't like other children. My mother is beautiful. She is one woman melting pot of Puerto Rican, Jamaican, and Danish heritage. I remember her skin being slightly tanned and her hair thick and wavy. She walked with a switch and a sway that everywhere she went men followed. She bathed herself in perfume and wore tight-fitting clothes. She adored herself with 24 karat gold. She was never without a man, somebody's man. But even with all of her beauty and charm, there was another side to Josephine. She was a very unhappy woman who didn't have any female friends. She based her whole existence on the ability to get a man. She always seemed unhappy because of these men who she so desperately needed in her life had done her wrong. There was a revolting door of men when I was growing up. Some of them even came back for seconds and thirds, but none of them ever stayed. I knew she loved my father and wanted to be with him, but he too didn't stay. His time with her seemed to be just that, time, and time makes things change. I witnessed my mother running around town aimlessly. I would hear the woman around town talk about her. It usually followed a complimentary comment about me. Karen, she is so smart. You know, she's the only one to score 100 on her test last week, but that mother of hers, I heard she was seen with such and so with so and so's husband. Eventually, my sisters came along, born only a year and a half apart. We were all bastards, each of us the product of a different man. Men who would never stay, men who would never come back, men who I was forced to call uncle, something for which I resented my mother. I never really knew that the two men who fathered my sisters, to tell the truth. I don't believe mother knew them very well either. She seemed to be in this vicious cycle of trying to keep men in her life by having their babies. After the third child, perhaps she began to get the hint. I remember vividly. One night I woke up and was startled to realize that I had been removed from bed and crammed into a bed with my infant sister. My mother was 5 months pregnant with my youngest sister. I immediately figured that my mother needed the bed. There was a back door in my room that led to the backyard. It was perfect for my mother, who had been sneaking men in and out of this door nearly her entire life. I couldn't make out what was being said, but the tone of whispers was heavy. Just as my vision had thoroughly adjusted, I realized the man standing in the doorway must have been the father of the baby she was carrying. I blinked a few times, wanting to get a better look, and tried to make it out what was being said. My mother was begging, "No, don't go, don't go." Her hands were wrapped around his wrist, and the two of them were caught in a sort of tug of war. My mother lost the battle, and he ringed free and charged out the door. It looked like a scene out of Gone with the Wind as my mother's rounded silhouette crouched to the floor in agony, crying. I was almost 8 years old, and I can remember not feeling at all sorry for her. In fact, I was a little happy. She deserved to feel the same sort of pain she inflicted upon those around her, including me. I was so embarrassed to be my mother's daughter. When I heard the women talk about her at school and in all the streets, I hung my head in shame. And as much as I hated my mother, I believe she felt the same way about me. I was reminded I was a reminder to her of everything she could not be. I was young and had my whole life ahead of me. I was smart. I was smart. And the entire island where I grew up acknowledged me. I was supposed to be my father's daughter, and around the island, even though he had a long since left, people remembered him. He had owned a few businesses on the island and employed many people. My father was charismatic, and because he was from New York, he stood on the tiny island. I would hear stories about how handsome and smart and witty he was. A woman once stopped us in the street and said, I was beautiful and that I looked just like him. As she walked away, my mother pulled me to the side and said, She's lying. She's just saying that because she used to like your father. My mother always made me feel less than a person. She despised the fact that I received constant praise and she was worthy of none. Before I was born, she was the center of now I had she was the center and now I had taken her shine. We were in competition from the day I arrived. My purpose in life was supposed to be to keep my father with her, to make him love her. But one night, but a one night stand is just that, no matter how long it lasts. The mistake he made wasn't leaving her, but leaving me with her. I was born in 1978 on a hot, sticky late August day on the 28 square mile island of St. Thomas. My mother was an 18-year-old native. My father was 23 and lived on the island from 1976 to 1984. After my father went back to his life on Long Island, New York, my mother and I lived with my grandmother, Vivian, in her four-bedroom house. Along with me, my mother and my grandmother were also my aunt, my two cousins, and my two uncles. Later came my two younger sisters. In all, there was 10 of us sharing four bedrooms. The house had one bathroom, uncovered windows, no hot water, no washing machines, and no air conditioning. On most days, we must boil water for our baths. On those days, my two cousins and I shared the same bathwater. The rule was the youngest bathed first, which was one of the few times being the youngest paid off for me. But sometimes there was no time to boil water. That's when we took cold showers and took them very quickly. My grandmother would wash all of the clothes by hand, everything towels, sheets, jeans, and shirts. Everyone was supposed to wash their own clothes, but my grandmother could often be seen outside with two large barrels washing everyone's clothes. Then they would be hung out to dry on the wire lines she had tied between two poles in the backyard. The bathroom was small and run down, as was most of the house. The water supply was prepared and delivered to the house by a water truck, which funneled the water into the cistern below the house. Because of this, we weren't allowed to use much water. So we kept empty buckets outside to save rainwater and even save bath water in order to flush the toilet. My grandmother saw no sense of flushing the clean water that could be used for drinking. Come winter, spring or fall, sunshine or hurricane, the windows to our house always seemed to be open. There were always louvers, metal shutters, and with a turning handle which would open them. There was no glass or screens to protect the house from insects or even large animals. It was not unusual to come home to a bat or a tarantula, a stray cat, or a chicken in the house. It was common to just chase them into the backyard. Hi, and it's going good. The backyard was like another world, filled with fruit trees like bananas, papayas, guava, avocado, passion fruit. Stray animals lived back there, surrounded by a plethora of herbs that my grandmother would boil down to make home remedies for all any and all alignments. This was the life. This was the way life was. It was normal. It was normal for my grandmother to take care of all of us. My mother would stay out all night, sometimes not returning for days at a time. But my grandmother, Vivian, was always there. I called her Ma. She encouraged me and she supported me. I was a smart kid, well known for my academic achievements. I was always featured in the school plays and showcases. When Stouffer's Corporation built a resort on the island waterfront in 1983, I was invited to recite poems I had written and to cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. My grandmother was there. My mother was not. My mother never came to any of my events. It was my grandmother who had made sure that every time I performed, I had shiny new patent leather shoes and a brand new dress. She was adamant that no one ever saw me in the same dress twice. My grandmother was strict, but it was evident that she loved me. The relationship between my grandmother and my mother was quite a different story. There was something there, and I was never sure about what it was. My grandmother Vivian had 7 children, some from different fathers. My mother was the youngest, and my mother was the youngest, and the sibling with the fairest complexion. Something that was obviously an issue. Sisters. I believe that my mother's father, Axel, was the only man who had married my grandmother, and my mother played that card as often as possible. In her mind, being light skinned and only being in her mind, being light skinned and the only non bastard of the 7 made her superior to others. If my grandmother did show any favor at all, it may have been only because my mother was the baby, the last born of her 7 children. It is my belief that it was my favor, that it was the favor my mother was shown outside of the house, which made her feel superior. And in turn, my aunts resented her. By the time I was born, the damage between my aunts and my mother had been done. Even as a young child, I could feel the tension. To those day, to this day, none of my aunts speak to my mother, and neither does my grandmother. As I get older, it seemed like my relationship with my mother grew more and more continuous. She became more impatient and more brutal towards me. One day after school, right after my first sister was born, I went to meet my mother at her job at a little clothing store called Marianne's. As I was leaving to walk home, I noticed a woman in a car parked outside next to the sidewalk. She called me over and asked if my mother had a baby, boy, or a girl. Being 7, I answered the question truthfully, a girl, and continued on my way home. Not even 30 minutes after I got into the house, my mother came barreling through the door. Hold on. A sinking feeling came over me. Automatically, I knew I was in trouble. I wasn't sure what I had done, but I knew something. I knew I was in trouble. You are not to tell my business out in these streets, my mother yelled at me. I don't care who asks you what. You keep your mouth shut. No one was at home. I prayed silently that my grandmother would make it through the door before the first blow of the bell. My mother walked away and came back with the Webster's World Edition dictionary. It was the biggest book I had ever seen in my life. It contained every single word in the English language and many from other parts of the world, including slang. This book probably weighed more than 10 pounds, and as she picked it up, she just knew, I just knew she was going to swing it across my head. I closed my eyes and kept praying for my grandmother to make it home from work. As I prayed, my mother was still going on about what I had done wrong. It was all too grown up for me to really understand. I didn't know the rules of engagement between adults. At 7 years old, I had no idea what business was and why other women were in hers. And for this, I wouldn't and for this I was about to get pummeled by a Webster's. I felt this heavy weight on my head and opened my eyes to see my mother had placed the dictionary on my head. Get on your knees and balance this book until I come back, she barked. And you better not move or take this book from your head. And then she was gone. I figured she left to undo any damage I had done by telling my mother's business. So I knelt there, still praying. My young, rational mind told me to get up from that spot and relax my aching back and knees. And if she didn't make it back, I had enough time to put the dictionary back on my head and get back in the position before she hit the door. It was a brilliant plan and could have most certainly worked, but my frightened true self had serious doubts. What if I don't make it into this position in time? I asked myself. Then she'll tear me to shreds and no one will be here to save me. This was the least violent punishment I had ever received. I was not going to mess it up. This was a good thing, I told myself. I stayed there on my knees and with the book on my head, crying and praying for 2 hours. I was weak, and my neck and my back and knees felt like they were breaking with each passing minute. And just as I ran out of tears, my grandmother came through the front door to see me there in the kitchen, struggling to maintain my punishment. What the hell? She screamed in English. In English, I immediately began to ramble off the events of which I had led to the scene. I relived the moments. I relived the moments. The tears began to stream again. The look on my grandmother's eyes was so painful. She didn't understand the story and how I could be punished for answering a question honestly, for essentially being a child. The hurt in her eyes made me hurt more, and I began to cry less for myself and more for her. It wouldn't be the last time that she had been there to rescue me. My mother had been a seamstress. I loved making clothes for my dolls out of her leftover scraps of material. One day, though, I had a better idea. In my in my drawer was a sock without a mate, white with a lacy ruffle around the edge. My creative brain went to work as I cut the toe from the sock and made a pair of shoulder straps, creating a frilly ball gown for my doll somewhere in the middle of all the excitement. I lost my mother's shears, hadn't noticed until she came home from work and started looking for them. She finally asked me, "Have you seen my scissors? They're not in the sewing box where I left them." By the look and the sheer terror in her eyes, she could tell that I had done something wrong. So I confessed to making the dress socks. She looked high and low. The scissors were lost, and I couldn't breathe or swallow because my next move could be the end. Just as I had given up on ever finding the orange-handed scissors, I spotted them behind the bed. Why hadn't I seen them there before? Just as I began to feel relieved that the scissors had been found, I was attacked from behind with a 6-inch wide leather belt. My mother beat me until my body was on fire. Every lash felt like 1,000. As she beat me, she spoiled absentees and told me how stupid I was. The lashes got more and more severe until the welts opened up and began to ooze blood. She had stripped me naked and beaten me until my body lay swollen and bloody. I was fading in and out of consciousness. The next thing I remember is my grandmother bursting through the bedroom door, grabbing me by my wrist and throwing me in the shower and running cold water over my blistering skin. On any other day, I dreaded the cold shower, but on that day, I reveled in it. It felt as if the cold water brought me back to life. As I stood there in the tub catching my breath, I couldn't hear my grandmother and my mother fighting. My grandmother Vivian was my guardian angel. My mother to me was the devil, and while the battle of good against evil played in the next room, I was in my own personal purgatory in the bedroom. Soon enough, my purgatory would turn into a living hell. That is like not trying to be weird, but there are sometimes people who are influenced by the devil. And I feel like her mother was one of them. A lot of mothers take their shit out on their children. I think I'm trying to think, do I want to end it there? I have about 12 minutes. Do I think I can read this? 4 pages left in this chapter. I think we're just going to do the first 2 chapters, and then we can just have a talk about what's going on so far. So a lot of abuse that happens, because I'm not saying that white children don't go through child abuse, because they definitely do, but how we discipline as Black people, how we discipline our kids, we get that from slavery. And it's being passed down generation through generation through generation through trauma. What happened to slaves when slaves didn't obey? They were beaten. They were humiliated. They were, is the word pacified? Crucified? Something like that. Crucified. They were shamed. They were taught. Imagine, you know how bad a lot of people of color speak to their children? You ever hear a Black parent cussing their child out and saying the craziest things to them. Like the most, like how she said her mom was calling her stupid. Where did this come from? This came from slavery. And we know that things are passed down through trauma, and that's not an opinion, that's a scientific fact. Things like abuse are definitely passed down through trauma, and that is exactly where we got a whooping. That's where the term a whooping came from, because slaves got a whooping. And then all that trauma and beatings and stuff that we were given through all those years, we started taking that shit out on our own children. And it's very, very sad. But that's going to be my little sidebar. I've read this before. I just read this when I was a kid, so I don't necessarily remember everything. But okay, we did the first 2 chapters today. I'm reading it on my audiobook because they didn't have it at the library. But yeah.